I was an only child, and for the longest time, I didn't mind it. My world was small but full, centered around my parents, who loved me fiercely and completely. Mom had always been delicate, the kind of woman who seemed to carry the weight of the world in the softness of her hands and the quiet determination of her eyes. Dad was steady, dependable, a rock of a man who loved her with a loyalty that could only be described as old-fashioned. I remember Mom telling me, when I was old enough to understand, how difficult my birth had been. Her pregnancy had been complicated from the start. Every doctor's visit was a mixture of hope and dread, her body fighting silently, her heart heavy with worry for me and for herself. And then the labor, oh, the labor. Mom's voice would tremble slightly even decades later when she described it. She had fought through hours of pain, each contraction a mountain to climb, until finally I was born. The doctor had shaken his head afterward, cautioning that she should never try again. The risk was too great. My mother had survived only by the sheer force of will and, perhaps, a bit of divine luck. Dad, ever the protector, had made a decision almost immediately. He didn't want my mother to risk her life again. He went to the doctor and underwent a vasectomy, and it was successful. The world, in a sense, had drawn a boundary around our small family. There would be no siblings, no second chance, just the three of us. At first, I felt a twinge of sadness, a childish longing for someone to share secrets and toys with, someone who would fight with me over the last slice of cake or the corner of a blanket. But that feeling was fleeting. My parents' attention, their love, and the warmth of our little household made up for the absence of brothers or sisters. We had routines, little traditions, and quiet evenings spent together. Mom would cook while I helped set the table, laughing at her exaggerated size when I dropped a fork. Dad would read the newspaper in his favorite armchair, always ready with a joke or a story when he noticed me staring. School came and went in a blur of crayons, playground adventures, and schoolyard friendships. I wasn't lonely, I had my parents. Every scraped knee, every tear over a lost doll, every triumph, and every failure, they were there. Mom's gentle guidance and Dad's quiet wisdom shaped me into someone careful, observant, and cautious, but also fiercely loyal to those I loved. I remember one rainy afternoon when I was about 8. The sky had turned the color of wet cement, and the wind rattled the windows. Mom had curled up in the living room with a blanket over her shoulders, and I had plopped down beside her with a notebook and crayons. We spent hours drawing imaginary worlds, inventing creatures, and laughing at our own absurdity. It was during moments like that that I realized how fragile life could be, yet how rich it felt when filled with love. Dad's influence was subtler but no less important. He would take me on weekend drives, teaching me the names of trees, the routes of rivers, and the constellations in the night sky. I could tell he loved us in a quiet, unshowy way, through presence, through actions, through the endless little things that went unnoticed, but mattered profoundly. As I grew older, into adolescence, I started to notice that life outside our home was messy, complicated, and sometimes unfair. Friends argued, parents fought, and I would listen with fascination and horror to the stories of other children. And yet, when I returned home, I felt a sense of peace. Our little family was a safe harbor in the storm of teenage life. Still, I couldn't ignore the occasional pang of loneliness. When I saw my friends with siblings, quarreling over trivial matters yet sharing secrets and confidences, a tiny part of me longed for that. I wondered what it would be like to have a sister to confide in, a brother to challenge me, someone who would be part of me in a way no friend ever could. But those thoughts were always fleeting. The reality of my life, the love and care of my parents, was enough. High school was a mixture of excitement and anxiety. I excelled in my studies, fueled in part by Mom's encouragement and Dad's quiet expectations. There were school projects, weekend games, and endless conversations at the dinner table where my parents would ask about my day, and I would spill the minutiae of teenage life, from my crushes to my homework struggles. Their involvement in my life was constant, never overbearing, always nurturing. It was a perfect bubble, a life insulated from the harsher realities of the world, or so I thought. The lessons I learned in those years, about trust, loyalty, and the quiet power of observation, would later shape the way I navigated much darker waters. Those lessons were invisible threads woven into the fabric of my being, guiding me when circumstances would later test the very core of my morality. Looking back, I realize now that childhood is often a prelude, a stage set for the inevitable collision with life's complexities. But at the time, I didn't care. I had what mattered most: parents who loved me, a home filled with laughter and warmth, and a sense of belonging that I believed would never be shaken. Little did I know, the first true storm was waiting just beyond the horizon, a storm that would test every ounce of patience, every fiber of loyalty, and every lesson my parents had tried to instill in me. The day I left for college, I felt a strange mix of excitement and guilt. Excitement, because I was finally stepping into a world of independence, freedom, and possibility. Guilt, because I knew leaving home meant leaving the people I loved most behind, my anchor, my parents. Mom had hugged me for what felt like hours in the airport parking lot, her face pressed against mine, her voice trembling slightly as she reminded me to call every night. Dad had been quieter, his eyes steady, but his hand had gripped mine longer than necessary, silently communicating his love and his worry. College was everything I had imagined: a whirlwind of lectures, dorm life, new friendships, and the intoxicating feeling of autonomy. I thrived academically, socially, and creatively, and I felt like I was finally becoming the person I had always hoped I could be. But life, as it often does, decided to shake the foundations I had so carefully built. It started with a phone call I will never forget. I had just returned from a late-night study session when my cell rang. It was Mom. I could hear the tremor in her voice before she even spoke. We need to talk," she said, her words clipped and fragile. I froze, my stomach tightening. "Mom, what is it?" There was a pause, a heavy, suffocating silence. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "It's cancer." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't process the words. "What kind?" I managed to choke out. "Stage 4, high-grade serous ovarian cancer," she said, her voice a mixture of fear, resignation, and an odd calm that I didn't understand at the time. "It's aggressive. The odds aren't good." I sat down hard on the edge of my dorm bed, my mind spinning. High-grade serous ovarian cancer. Stage 4. Aggressive. She'd fought so hard to bring me into the world, and now she was fighting again, and this time, I couldn't protect her. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, whispered conversations with doctors, and late-night calls filled with panic and tears. Dad was stoic, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but I could see the cracks in his armor. I could see the fear in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. Mom, on the other hand, was brave in ways I didn't fully appreciate at the time. She fought. She fought with every ounce of energy she had left. Chemotherapy, radiation, endless tests and procedures. She endured it all with a grace that left me in awe. But while Mom's battle was public, Dad's betrayal was quietly taking root. I had no idea, not even an inkling, of the storm that was slowly approaching from a different direction. It started subtly, Dad spending more time at work, more late nights, more phone calls he stepped out of the room to take. And then there was her, the coworker. A woman not much older than me, her presence initially explained away as kindness, sympathy, or coincidence. She began integrating herself into our lives in ways that, at first, seemed harmless. She brought groceries, tidied the house, helped me with assignments when Mom was too weak, and even stayed with Mom during chemotherapy sessions. I noticed the frequency of her visits, but I was naive. I believed she was simply a kind woman, a friend in times of hardship. Mom, of course, noticed the dynamic. She said nothing, but I could sense it in the way she watched the two of them, a subtle tension in her gaze. Dad seemed oblivious, or perhaps careful to appear so, but I was too caught up in my own grief and college life to question it. One evening, after a long day of classes, I visited Mom at the hospital. She was lying in her bed, hair thinning from chemotherapy, but her eyes still sharp, still alive. We played chutes and ladders, laughing quietly as the pieces clattered across the board. "You know," she said suddenly, her voice soft but firm, "your father isn't planning to reverse his vasectomy." I paused mid-roll, unsure what she meant. Yeah, I know. Why? She gave me a small, sad smile. "I think you'd best keep it in mind." I didn't question her further. I was too focused on her hand in mine, on the warmth of her presence, on the reality that this could be the last time we played a game together. Later that night, as I kissed her goodbye, she whispered, "You'll be fine on your own." By morning, she was gone. Mom's death was a seismic shift in my world. The grief was raw, unrelenting. And yet, in the midst of mourning, the coworker was there, seamlessly stepping into the void. She helped organize the funeral, brought meals, and slowly, imperceptibly, began making herself a fixture in our lives. I remember watching her move through our home with a kind of ease, her smile comforting, but her presence increasingly unavoidable. It was subtle at first, like the slow warming of water in a pot. You don't notice the temperature rising until it's too late, and by then, the water is boiling. I had no reason to suspect anything. To me, she was simply a helpful, generous presence in a time of unimaginable sorrow. I couldn't have known that the first real betrayal was already underway, quietly, invisibly, reshaping the landscape of my family and my future. College continued, but it no longer felt like a sanctuary. Every phone call, every visit home, carried an undercurrent of tension I didn't fully understand. My studies, my friendships, my ambitions, all felt overshadowed by the specter of loss and the subtle intrusion of a woman who would later become something much darker in my life. That was the first storm. I didn't know it yet, but it was only the beginning. The weeks after Mom's passing were a haze. The house felt impossibly quiet, the rooms echoing with memories that were suddenly too sharp to bear. I had no siblings to share the burden of grief, no one to talk to about the confusion and sorrow that consumed me. Dad was there, of course, but he seemed distant. There was a hollowness behind his eyes, a distraction in his movements. I tried to chalk it up to grief, but there was a subtle shift in the air that I couldn't ignore. And then there was her. At first, her presence seemed like a blessing. She arrived with casseroles, cookies, and neatly wrapped bundles of groceries. She helped sort laundry, tidied up the house, and even assisted me with paperwork I couldn't handle while juggling classes and grief. She was always cheerful, always willing, always helpful. "Here, I brought some lasagna," she said one evening, smiling brightly as she set the steaming dish on the kitchen counter. "I thought you could use something warm. You know, you've been so busy with school and everything." I smiled, exhausted but grateful. "Thanks, that's really thoughtful." Little did I know that thoughtfulness was part of a strategy. A slow, deliberate integration into our lives. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. She didn't announce herself as a permanent fixture, she didn't overstep boundaries. She just existed, and over time, her presence became expected, normal. She was always there when I needed someone to talk to. When Dad was stuck at work or lost in his own grief, she sat with me in the living room, asking about my classes, my friends, my life. She laughed when I joked, cried when I cried, and offered advice that was occasionally surprisingly sharp. I thought of her as a kind-hearted friend, a comforting adult in the chaos of my bereavement. Sometimes, I would catch Dad watching her in ways I didn't understand. A lingering glance, a tight jaw, a small smile that seemed private. I dismissed it as nothing. My grief made me paranoid, after all. I had no reason to suspect anything. One afternoon, she suggested we reorganize the living room. "I thought we could move the bookshelves over here," she said, gesturing toward the corner near the window. "It'll open up more space, and the light is better for reading." I nodded absently, too exhausted to argue. "Sure, whatever you think is best." It was after she finished moving the shelves that I began to notice small things. A box of her personal items appeared in the corner, neatly tucked behind the couch. A few photos of her friends on the mantel, subtly placed as if she belonged here. I told myself I was imagining it, that grief was making me paranoid. Then came the subtle influence over Dad. She started calling him at work more frequently, asking how he was, offering to run errands. He began to respond with longer calls, laughter I had never heard in the days after Mom's death. Sometimes I would catch snippets of conversation when I passed the kitchen, small, intimate things, hushed tones that made my stomach churn. But I still didn't know. I couldn't have known. To me, she was just helpful. A good friend. Someone who had stepped in to fill the void left by Mom's absence. One night, I came home from studying and found her in the kitchen, washing dishes. She looked up and smiled at me. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, her voice warm and casual. "How was your day?" "Tiring," I admitted, sinking into a chair. I had 3 lectures back to back and a lab session. "I'm exhausted." "Here, you should eat something first," she said, pushing a plate of pasta toward me. "You need to keep your strength up." I ate quietly, appreciating her care. Inside, however, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered something I didn't want to acknowledge. She's too present. She's too comfortable here. But I pushed the thought aside. I didn't want to believe it. As weeks turned into months, her integration became more pronounced. She began helping with bills, organizing my study materials, even offering advice about scholarships and career plans. At first, I felt gratitude. She was efficient, caring, almost unnervingly competent. But there were moments, tiny, fleeting moments, where I saw something else in her. A subtle look shared with Dad, the way she leaned on his shoulder when he thought I wasn't looking, the small laugh she gave him that I had never heard directed at me. It was like watching a shadow creep across a sunny room, at first imperceptible, but impossible to ignore once it reached the corners. One evening, I overheard a conversation she was having with a friend on the phone. "I can't wait until it's official," she said, her tone casual, almost giddy. "We're perfect together, and soon it'll all be mine." I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. Something about the way she said it, the way she said mine, set off alarms I wasn't ready to confront. But again, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I knew or what I suspected. I began paying closer attention. Small clues piled up, like breadcrumbs leading to a truth I wasn't ready to face. The frequency of her visits, the way she handled Dad's schedule, the subtle influence she had over decisions in the house. And yet, every time I confronted myself with suspicion, I pushed it away. Grief made me want to see kindness where there might be none. She had become, without my noticing, part of the fabric of our lives. A comforting presence to the outside world, a quiet intruder to those of us who had loved and lost. And through it all, I began to learn a lesson I would carry with me for years. Betrayal doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it seeps in unnoticed, slowly changing the world around you until one day you realize that the home you once knew is no longer yours. I wasn't ready to realize that yet. Not fully. But the first seeds of suspicion had been planted. The air in the hospice room was thick with the scent of antiseptic and flowers, a strange mixture of sterility and comfort. I sat by Mom's side, her frail hand resting in mine, and watched her chest rise and fall with a rhythm that seemed impossibly delicate for someone who had fought so hard to survive. Her hair had thinned almost completely, the chemotherapy having stripped it away, leaving her scalp smooth and pale. Yet her eyes, those sharp, knowing eyes, still held the fire that had guided me through my childhood. We spent our days much as we had in the past, though the games we played were simpler now. Chutes and ladders became our ritual. It was silly, childish even, but it brought moments of normalcy, of laughter, and fleeting distraction from the relentless shadow of disease. Mom's laugh, though softer now, was like a balm to my heart. "You're getting lucky," she said one afternoon, nudging my game piece forward. "Are you sure you're not cheating?" I grinned. "Of course not. Pure skill." She chuckled, a sound that made the room feel warm despite the sterile surroundings. But beneath the humor, there was a gravity in her gaze, a weight that I couldn't yet comprehend. As the days passed, her strength waned. She slept more and conversations became brief but meaningful. One evening, as the sun set and the room filled with an amber glow, she turned her head to me with surprising clarity. "You know your father isn't planning to reverse his vasectomy, right?" I froze, my hand tightening around hers. "Yeah, I know," I said cautiously, though I wasn't entirely sure what she meant by bringing it up now. Why? She looked at me, her eyes steady and unwavering. I think you'd best keep it in mind. Her words lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. I wanted to press her for more, to demand clarity, but something in her expression, calm, resolute, almost maternal in its warning, stopped me. She had chosen to share only this fragment, leaving the rest for me to understand in my own time. We continued our game in silence, the pieces moving across the board with the soft clatter of dice. I watched her carefully, memorizing the lines of her face, the way her lips curved when she smiled, the faint tremor in her fingers. Every detail felt precious, finite. Later that night, I kissed her forehead as I prepared to leave, whispering a quiet, "I love you, Mom." She smiled softly, eyes half closed. "You'll be fine on your own." I didn't argue. Somehow, I knew she was leaving me with more than words. She was leaving me with strength, with the unspoken knowledge that I would need it. That night, she passed away peacefully. The weight of her absence settled over me like a storm I wasn't prepared for. The funeral was a blur of faces, condolences, and the strange feeling of stepping into a world that had lost its center. And yet, amidst the grief, she was there, her presence almost ghost-like, but tangible in the way everyone spoke about her, the way the air seemed to carry the echo of her laughter. And there she was too, the coworker. Always present, always helpful. She moved seamlessly into the spaces Mom had once occupied, bringing casseroles, organizing the house, and offering quiet words of comfort. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like the slow rise of water in a bathtub. You don't notice the temperature at first. By the time it's hot enough to burn, it's too late. She helped me with phone calls, coordinated schedules, and somehow became the adult I didn't know I needed or thought I needed in the aftermath of my mother's death. At the time, I believed her intentions were pure. How could I suspect that the very woman helping me grieve was also quietly building a place for herself in the life my mother had created? Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The house felt alive again, but with a subtle, invasive energy that I couldn't quite name. She was part of the routines, part of the furniture, part of the rhythm of life in ways that should have felt comforting, but instead left me with a persistent, gnawing unease. I began to notice small things, her laughter with Dad that lingered too long, the way she rearranged the living room furniture as if claiming ownership, the faint traces of her belongings appearing in corners of rooms. And yet, I told myself it was all normal. She was helping. She was grieving too, wasn't she? But grief does strange things. It bends perception. It allows trust to form where suspicion might be warranted. And so, I allowed her to exist in our home, in our lives, in our grieving process, unaware that the first seeds of betrayal had already been planted. Mom's absence left a hollow that no one could fill. And yet, in the days and weeks after she was gone, the very person who would eventually betray her was becoming the person who seemed to occupy the space Mom had once held. It was a quiet invasion, measured and methodical. By the time I realized it, the foundation of my family had already begun to shift. And though I didn't know it yet, I would soon uncover a truth so profound, so devastating, that it would test the very limits of my patience, morality, and capacity for revenge. Mom was gone. But her final words, her warnings, and her strength would guide me in the storm that was about to hit. The months following Mom's death felt like stepping into a world that had shifted imperceptibly, like the ground beneath me had subtly tilted. The house no longer felt like my sanctuary. It was a stage, and the actors had changed. She was there, the coworker, seamlessly moving through our lives as if she had always belonged. At first, I told myself it was normal. She had been helpful during Mom's illness. Her intentions must be good. She cooked meals, helped with laundry, tidied the rooms, and even arranged small touches to make the house feel lived in again. Flowers on the kitchen counter, freshly folded towels, carefully organized shelves. It all felt comforting, almost maternal, but something about it gnawed at the edges of my mind. She had a presence that demanded attention without ever asking for it. A subtle, quiet influence that crept into our routines. I noticed the way she consulted Dad about trivial matters, which brand of detergent to buy, how to arrange the furniture, even how I should spend my study time. And Dad, he listened. He deferred. He agreed. Slowly, imperceptibly, he began relying on her judgment more than my mother's memory or my own input. One afternoon, I came home from campus to find her in the kitchen, rolling out dough for cookies. She looked up and smiled at me, her hands dusted with flour. "Hey, honey," she said warmly. "I thought I'd make some treats while I tidy the pantry. You've been studying so hard. I want you to have a little reward when you get home." I nodded, my stomach twisting. "Thanks. I appreciate it." Her smile lingered in my mind long after I left the kitchen. It was a perfectly practiced warmth, the kind that made you trust someone instantly. And yet, there was something in the ease with which she moved through the house, like a predator moving carefully through unfamiliar territory, claiming it piece by piece, that set my nerves on edge. Over time, I began noticing other things. Small, seemingly inconsequential signs that hinted at a deeper intrusion. A box of her personal items tucked into a corner of the guest room. A new set of mugs in the kitchen cupboard with her initials subtly engraved. The way she laughed at Dad's jokes in a way that had always been Mom's. I tried to dismiss it. Grief made me desperate for comfort. I wanted to believe she was helping, not taking. I wanted to see her as a friend, a supportive presence. And in many ways, she was. But my instincts, honed over years of careful observation and patience, whispered otherwise. It was in the small moments, the ones that seemed insignificant at the time, that I began to understand the pattern. Like the time she suggested we reorganize Dad's study. "I thought if we moved the bookshelves here," she said, gesturing toward the corner near the window, "you'd have more space for your work, and the light is better. Don't you think?" Dad nodded without hesitation, and I felt a pang in my chest. He didn't consult me, didn't consider my opinion. He simply agreed, deferring to her judgment in a way that used to be reserved for my mother. Or the evening she cooked dinner and quietly slipped a note to Dad, reminding him to schedule a meeting with a client. He read it, smiled, and thanked her as if it were perfectly normal. And it was because she had made it normal. I started noticing patterns in her behavior, patterns that others wouldn't see. How she subtly positioned herself near Dad during conversations. How she complimented him at exactly the right moment. How she waited for opportunities to offer help in ways that made him dependent. It was deliberate, calculated, and I hated myself for seeing it, for acknowledging that someone could be this cunning. And yet, despite my growing unease, I did nothing. I watched silently as she claimed more space in our lives. I watched Dad defer to her, rely on her, and slowly allow her to become indispensable. I realized then that grief had made me vulnerable. I had been so consumed by loss, so desperate for support, that I had welcomed her intrusion without questioning her motives. And now, as I observed her ease, her confidence, and her subtle control, I felt a mixture of anger, fear, and helplessness. At night, lying in bed, I replayed conversations, gestures, and small incidents in my mind. I questioned my judgment, my perception. Was I overreacting? Was it possible that she truly cared, that her intentions were pure? But deep down, a part of me knew. She was no friend. She was an interloper. A shadow threading itself into the fabric of our family, sewing herself into the empty spaces left by my mother's absence. And the worst part? Dad didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he didn't care. I felt my loyalty to my mother and to the truth growing into a quiet, simmering anger. I didn't know yet how I would act or when, but I knew one thing with certainty. I would not allow her to rewrite our lives without consequence. Grief had left me vulnerable, yes, but it had also sharpened my perception. I saw patterns others overlooked, motives hidden beneath smiles and platitudes. I knew that her integration into our lives was intentional, that her kindness was a carefully chosen tool, and that the storm she had brought with her was only beginning. By the time I began piecing it together, I realized I had entered a silent battle, one fought not with words or confrontation, but with observation, patience, and a careful gathering of knowledge. It was a battle I was determined to win, even if I didn't yet understand the cost. It happened slowly, like the crack of dawn creeping across a dark sky. The realization didn't hit me all at once. Instead, it arrived in fragments, small clues that I had previously ignored or rationalized away. Each piece of evidence was a thread, and together they began to weave a picture I had never wanted to see. At first, it was subtle. A slip of the tongue, a laugh that lingered too long, the way Dad's eyes would soften when he spoke with her. Little things that had seemed innocuous, even comforting, during the haze of grief, now glared at me like warning signs. One afternoon, while sorting through mail and bills, I found a receipt from a restaurant, an expensive dinner Dad had taken her to, dated weeks after Mom's passing. My chest tightened, a familiar cold knot of suspicion forming. I stuffed the papers back into the envelope, telling myself I was overreacting. Perhaps it was a professional dinner. Perhaps she was just friendly. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and once planted, it grew fast. The real breakthrough came one quiet evening when I was visiting her, the coworker, in the living room. I had noticed her lingering glances at Dad, subtle touches on his arm, the faint blush creeping across her cheeks when he laughed. Something about it no longer felt accidental. My curiosity, my instinct, pushed me to look deeper. I started piecing things together. The timing of her visits, the way Dad seemed to depend on her guidance, the sudden intimacy in their interactions. And then, through a careful combination of observation, overheard conversations, and digging into timelines, I uncovered the truth. The affair had begun shortly after Mom's diagnosis. The room spun around me. My mother had been fighting for her life in the hospital, enduring treatments that would have left the strongest of people weak and trembling. And during that time, my father had turned to another woman, her, to fill a void that wasn't hers to fill. The betrayal was almost too much to comprehend. Anger surged through me, a white-hot rage that left my hands trembling. I wanted to confront them immediately, to scream, to expose the truth and make them feel even a fraction of the pain they had caused. My fingers itched to dial their numbers, to unleash a torrent of words I had spent months holding back. And then I remembered something Mom had said. Something she had whispered in her final days, a quiet warning about my father's vasectomy. I thought back to her words, "I think you'd best keep it in mind." Suddenly, a chilling realization hit me. The affair wasn't just a betrayal, it was a gamble. A dangerous, calculated gamble. And the stakes were higher than I had even imagined. She had spoken, in passing, about wanting children, about her dreams of motherhood. Mom had known. Mom had known everything, and she had trusted me to act, to carry out a task that would protect her daughter from further betrayal. I stared at the ceiling, my mind spinning. The injustice of it all burned like fire inside me. They had taken advantage of grief, manipulated love, and hidden the truth that would have changed the course of this woman's life. And yet, I didn't act. I didn't confront. I didn't warn. Instead, I made a choice. I would play the long game. It was a dangerous gamble, yes. There was no guarantee it would work. I could be discovered, my plan could fail, and the opportunity for revenge could slip through my fingers forever. But the alternative, acting impulsively, revealing the truth immediately, felt like giving them exactly what they wanted. And I wouldn't let them win. Not yet. For months, I maintained the facade of normalcy. I laughed when they joked. I smiled when they celebrated milestones. I supported their engagement, their wedding preparations, all the while hiding the truth that could shatter everything. I even went so far as to manipulate small medical details to ensure that coworker remained unaware of the critical information. Test results were misplaced, conversations were carefully redirected, subtle signs were obscured. Every action was calculated, precise, and fraught with the tension of a tightrope walk. Inside, I screamed. I wanted the world to know what they had done to Mom, to me, to the sanctity of our family. I wanted them to feel the consequences of their selfishness. But outwardly, I played the part of the supportive friend, the understanding daughter, the harmless observer. And through it all, I remembered Mom. Her words, her trust, her subtle warnings. She had prepared me for this moment in ways I hadn't fully appreciated at the time. Her belief in my ability to act, to wait, to endure, became the guiding force behind my calculated patience. I watched them, observed their every move, and bided my time. The affair, the betrayal, the lies, they had set the stage. And I was ready to take the final act, to deliver justice not through confrontation, but through the careful orchestration of truth and timing. Patience became my weapon. Silence became my shield. And as I played my part in the happy family charade, I knew that one day, all their careful plotting would unravel. The long game had begun, and I was holding all the pieces. By the time they announced their engagement, I had perfected the art of outward composure. I smiled when they shared the news, my voice warm and enthusiastic, my eyes reflecting the pride of someone who believed in family, loyalty, and love. Inside, however, I was a storm, anger, grief, and moral outrage clashing with a cold, calculated patience that I had honed over months. The coworker had worked tirelessly to embed herself in our lives, and now she had reached the next milestone, a public commitment to my father. I watched their interactions carefully, noting patterns and habits, the subtle ways she exercised control, the ways Dad deferred to her judgment without even noticing. Every conversation, every glance, every subtle gesture became part of my mental map, the blueprint for the long game I was preparing to execute. It wasn't easy. Maintaining a facade of normalcy while privately seething required a discipline I hadn't known I possessed. I smiled at wedding dress appointments, offered advice on catering, and even helped coordinate the engagement party. I laughed with them, celebrated them, and made every effort to appear supportive. Each moment was a test of my resolve, a reminder of the power I held quietly in my hands. I became meticulous in managing information. Dad's urologist test results, which revealed the permanent vasectomy, were carefully manipulated. I ensured that coworker wouldn't discover them while simultaneously giving Dad access, maintaining the illusion that the truth was hidden only from her. It was a delicate balance. One wrong move and the entire plan could collapse. At night, I would lie awake, running scenarios through my mind. What if she discovered the truth too early? What if Dad realized I was interfering? What if I miscalculated and lost the opportunity to deliver the lesson they so richly deserved? The stakes were high, and every choice carried consequences. And yet, there was a strange satisfaction in the strategy. I felt a connection to Mom in those moments, as if her trust and wisdom guided me from beyond. She had known, and she had entrusted me with this responsibility. It was a heavy burden, yes, but it was also a form of justice, one that required patience, cunning, and restraint. I watched their wedding day with a mixture of pride and fury. The ceremony was beautiful, the kind of day one hopes to remember forever. I gave a toast, spoke warmly, and wore a smile that masked the tempest within me. They believed they had achieved happiness, but the truth, hidden beneath layers of patience and calculation, was mine alone to wield. As the years passed, the long game continued. I got married myself, built my own life, and started a family. Dad and coworker played the roles of doting grandparents, and I played the part of the supportive daughter, the happy family member. And through it all, I maintained my vigilance, observing every action, noting every opportunity, storing away every small detail that would later amplify the impact of the revelation. It was during one of our weekly coffee meetings that the moment I had been waiting for finally approached. Coworker sat across from me, her eyes tired, her posture slumped. She had been struggling quietly for years. "I just don't understand," she said, voice trembling. "We've tried so hard to have children, but nothing is happening. I don't know why." My heart pounded. This was it. The payoff. The moment when patience, calculation, and strategy would come together. I maintained a careful balance of sympathy and restraint, pretending to be a friend while preparing to reveal the truth that would shatter her illusions. "You mean Dad didn't tell you?" I asked, feigning ignorance, letting the tension build. Her eyes widened. "Didn't tell me what?" I let the words hang, giving her time to feel the anxiety, the confusion. Then, slowly, deliberately, I revealed the truth, the vasectomy, the impossibility of reversal, the years wasted in pursuit of a child that could never come naturally. The reaction was immediate and visceral. She slumped in her chair, her shoulders bowing as if the weight of the world had descended upon them. Tears fell freely as she realized the depth of her deception, the betrayal she had suffered at the hands of the man she had trusted most. I held her, offering comfort, but the satisfaction beneath it was undeniable. She had finally experienced a fraction of the disruption, confusion, and helplessness that I had felt for years. The long game had succeeded. When she left, I knew it was the last time I would see her. My role in her life was over, and the lesson had been delivered. Weeks later, I received news that she had filed for divorce. Dad, furious and incredulous, blamed me for everything. I responded calmly, with a quiet finality that mirrored the discipline I had exercised for years. You and Mom did a good job teaching me how to keep secrets. And, just like that, the long game concluded. Justice, delayed but deliberate, had been served. The weeks following the revelation were quiet, almost eerily so. Coworker had moved out, filing for divorce and leaving Dad to face the consequences of his deception alone. Friends and family quickly distanced themselves from him. His reputation as a trusted husband and professional had been shattered. The man who had betrayed my mother and then entrusted me with the knowledge he kept hidden was left isolated. I watched the unraveling from a distance, my emotions a tangle of satisfaction, grief, and lingering sorrow. There was no joy in cruelty. The victory was bittersweet. Yes, the injustice had been corrected, but the years lost, the pain inflicted, could never be reclaimed. I had played the long game and won, but it had cost me something too. I found myself reflecting on Mom's wisdom in those final days. She had trusted me to act with patience, to honor her insight, and to navigate the betrayal in a way that she never could. Her quiet foresight had guided me through a labyrinth of grief and deception, and I felt her presence with me still, an invisible hand of support in the darkest moments. And yet, I could not escape the lingering guilt. Perhaps I should have intervened sooner. Perhaps Coworker could have been spared years of hope, disappointment, and heartache. But the knowledge I carried, Mom's warning about Dad's vasectomy, the understanding of the affair, was a burden too heavy to act upon impulsively. Timing, as painful as it was the instrument of justice. Life moved forward. I married, had children, and built a family filled with love, trust, and honesty. My home was full of laughter and warmth, the kind of life Mom had always envisioned for me. I reveled in the simple joys, in the small victories of parenting, and in the security of a family bound by genuine affection rather than deception. Dad remained distant, a shadow of the man he once was. His anger toward me was bitter, but ultimately hollow, his relationships fractured, his life a testament to the consequences of selfishness and deceit. Coworker's absence, though sad in its own right, was a relief. Her presence had been a constant reminder of what had been taken from my mother and from me. I often thought of Mom in quiet moments, remembering her laughter, her resilience, and her unwavering wisdom. She had known her time was limited, yet she had prepared me to endure, to observe, and to act with both patience and justice. Her guidance had shaped the choices I made, and even in her absence, I felt her influence in every careful decision, every act of restraint, and every moment of strategic patience. Though I had acted with calculated precision, I never lost sight of compassion. When Coworker finally learned the truth, I held her, comforted her, and allowed her to process the betrayal in her own way. My goal was never to hurt unnecessarily. It was to ensure that the consequences of deceit were fully understood, and that justice, delayed but deliberate, was served. In the end, the story was not only about betrayal and revenge. It was about resilience, wisdom, and the lessons imparted by those we love most. It was about understanding that sometimes justice requires patience, discernment, and a willingness to endure in silence until the right moment arrives. I am not perfect. I am aware of the moral grayness of my actions. The satisfaction I felt was intertwined with sorrow, guilt, and reflection. But I also know this: I honored my mother, upheld the truth, and ensured that deceit and betrayal did not go unchecked. That was the legacy she entrusted to me, and one I carried out with deliberate care. The house is quieter now. The wounds have healed, but the lessons remain. And in the quiet moments, when I watch my children play or hear the laughter of my husband echo through our home, I remember Mom, her strength, and the wisdom she imparted in her final days. Justice, patience, and resilience are not easy. They are often bitter and complicated, but they endure. And in that endurance, I found closure.